What happens when the most powerful navy on Earth spends over 3 months blockading a country, fighting off drone swarms in the dark, and absorbing missile strikes in one of the world's most dangerous waterways, and then suddenly the guns go quiet and a peace deal lands on the table? That is not a victory parade. That is a countdown to something far more complicated. And the question everyone should be asking right now is not whether the deal gets signed, but what it actually means for the next war that nobody's calling a war yet. Before we go any further, if this kind of deep analysis is what you need right now, do 3 things. Hit that like button so more people who need to understand this can find it. Subscribe, because we go beneath the headlines and never just repeat what the news already told you. And share this with someone who thinks the Iran situation is over just because Trump said a deal is signed. It is absolutely not over, and the next 5 minutes will show you exactly why. Let us go back to where this all began, because you cannot understand where we are right now without understanding the chain of events that brought us here. On February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what became one of the most concentrated air campaigns in modern military history, nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours. The targets were Iranian military infrastructure, missile sites, command nodes, and the facilities that housed decades of nuclear program investment. And at the center of it all was one decision that shook the region to its foundation: the assassination of Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, a man who had held the Islamic Republic together through wars, sanctions, protests, and international isolation for over 3 decades. When Khamenei died, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps did not collapse. It responded. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. Within hours of the strikes, IRGC patrol boats were in the waterway. Sea mines were being laid in the navigable channels. Merchant vessels attempting to pass were boarded, attacked, and turned back. The strait, which carries roughly 25% of the world's seaborne oil trade and 20% of its liquefied natural gas every single day, went dark. Not metaphorically dark. Operationally, economically, strategically dark. 73 tankers loaded with cargo sat frozen on the wrong side of a military line, bleeding money by the hour. Global fuel prices spiked. Airlines rerouted. The economic shockwave moved faster than any missile. That closure was not a random act of retaliation. It was Iran executing the one strategy it had spent decades preparing. They could not match American aircraft carriers. They could not outproduce American destroyers. They could not fight a conventional war against 3 carrier strike groups and win. They knew that, and they planned for that. What they could do was hold a choke point that the entire industrialized world depended on and say, if you come for us, you pay a price every single day, in dollars, in oil, in the stability of markets you cannot afford to lose. If that strategy sounds familiar, it should. The swarm doctrine that Iranian military planners built around the strait was one of the most genuinely creative asymmetric strategies in modern warfare. A Shahed 136 drone costs around $20,000 to build. An AIM-39X Sidewinder missile, one of the interceptors used to shoot it down, costs around $400,000. A rolling airframe missile runs close to $900,000. Do that math across a swarm of 150 drones, and you quickly understand why American naval planners ran those numbers for years and did not sleep comfortably after. For every dollar Iran spent attacking, the United States was spending somewhere between $20 and $100 defending. And every interceptor fired from the vertical launch cells of an Arleigh Burke destroyer is an interceptor that does not come back. Those cells hold a fixed count. Resupply takes days, not hours. The entire logic of the swarm was to grind that number down until a ship had to pull back and the window in the blockade opened. That strategy had real teeth for a long time. Then, March 5th, 2026 happened. The United States Navy deployed the HELIOS system, the high-energy laser with integrated optical dazzler and surveillance, aboard an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating in the Gulf as part of Operation Epic Fury. CENTCOM released footage confirming the system was installed and operational. And when you understand what HELIOS actually does, you understand why that single deployment was one of the most strategically significant moments of the entire conflict. A laser beam travels at the speed of light. At the engagement distances inside the Strait of Hormuz, where threats are measured in single-digit miles rather than hundreds of miles, the gap between firing and impact is effectively zero. Iran spent 30 years engineering drones with radar-scattering profiles, building fast attack boats with hulls shaped to confuse fire control systems, designing swarm tactics that exploited the seconds between when a missile launches and when it arrives. HELIOS does not give those seconds back. It removes them entirely. And unlike every interceptor missile in a vertical launch cell, HELIOS does not have a magazine. Its capacity is limited by the ship's power generation, not by any count of physical munitions. The 4-gas turbine generators on an Arleigh Burke produce somewhere between 7 and 12 megawatts of electrical power. HELIOS draws a fraction of that per engagement. It was reversed by a factor so large it made every calculation Iran's military planners had relied on functionally worthless. Now, while all of this was happening above the waterline, the United States was also fighting a different war below it. Iran had deployed its Ghadir-class midget submarines into the Strait of Hormuz. These are small diesel-electric boats designed specifically for shallow water environments. The Persian Gulf runs between 30 and 60 meters deep in the navigable channels, and the ambient noise of constant commercial traffic provides natural acoustic cover for a vessel that runs quietly on battery power. These submarines were Iran's underwater answer to the blockade, a persistent torpedo threat that kept American surface ships operating with one eye constantly below the surface. The answer to that threat was something called Lamprey, Lockheed Martin's extra-large unmanned undersea vehicle, an autonomous underwater system specifically built for shallow water operations in exactly the kind of environment the Persian Gulf represents. Its acoustic signature is engineered to blend into the noise of commercial shipping. It can track and follow contacts at depth. Combined with HELIOS operating above the waterline, the United States was now running a simultaneous above and below surface defensive architecture from the same hull. That was the specific combination Iran's swarm doctrine had been built to prevent from ever existing. So when Iranian IRGC commanders looked at the tactical picture in April of 2026, they were looking at the following reality. Their supreme leader was dead. Their missile infrastructure had been documented, targeted, and in many cases destroyed. Their coastal anti-ship missile sites along the strait had been hit by 5,000-pound bunker buster bombs. 16 of their mine layer vessels had been sunk. Their fast attack fleet was degraded. Their drone swarm economics had been inverted by a deployed operational system. Their proxy networks across the region were losing funding and ammunition. And on April 13, 2026, after the Islamabad ceasefire talks collapsed entirely, the United States imposed a full naval blockade on Iran. Not just a blockade of the strait, a blockade of Iranian ports. The USS Spruance and Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit seized the Iranian-flagged vessel Tuska on April 19th in the first direct enforcement action. CENTCOM reported 85 vessels intercepted. The blockade was costing Iran an estimated $500 million per day. Food inflation inside Iran was running at triple digits. Hard currency reserves were being rationed. The population was experiencing material conditions unlike anything the Islamic Republic had seen since its founding. Then came May 4th, 2026, Operation Project Freedom. American naval escorts began guiding trapped vessels through the strait. Trump had announced it publicly, telling reporters the military would guide ships through and respond forcefully to any interference. Iran's military responded publicly that American forces would be attacked if they entered. The American ships entered. The Iranian forces did not follow through. That moment was its own kind of message, loud and unmistakable to anyone paying attention. By late May, negotiations had produced enough movement that Trump announced the end of the blockade. Talks continued through Doha. On June 15, 2026, U.S. and Iranian officials announced a preliminary framework agreement. By June 16th, Trump confirmed an MOU had been signed electronically. The deal, as currently structured, ends direct hostilities, reopens the Strait of Hormuz, lifts the naval blockade, and establishes a 60-day ceasefire period for further talks on the thorniest remaining issue, Iran's nuclear program, enriched uranium stockpiles, sanctions relief, and the long-term architecture of any lasting agreement. Here's what that deal looks like if you are reading it from inside Tehran right now. Iran lost its supreme leader on day one. It lost significant military infrastructure in the first 12 hours. It fought a nearly 4-month campaign that degraded its conventional naval forces, exhausted its drone inventory, burned through its hard currency, and produced a domestic economic crisis, severe enough that the population was experiencing conditions the regime could not indefinitely sustain. And it ended the conflict by signing a memorandum of understanding that defers the nuclear question, which was the entire reason the war started, to 60 days of further negotiations. The IRGC's public response to this has followed a predictable institutional pattern. Statements calling the MOU a victory, declarations that Iran's resistance forced America to negotiate, warnings that any violation will be met with a forceful response. Those statements are being produced by an organization managing the psychological impact of an outcome on its own forces. When an institution that built its entire identity around resistance and strategic patience finds itself signing an interim agreement after losing its supreme leader, its missile infrastructure, its naval assets, and the economic advantage of its 30-year asymmetric strategy, the statements it produces are not analysis. They are institutional survival behavior. But here is the part of this story that most coverage is not giving enough attention to, because the deal being called a peace agreement right now is explicitly not a permanent peace agreement. The thorniest issue, as one wire service headline put it this morning, is still to be negotiated. Iran's nuclear program was the reason U.S. and Israeli forces launched in February. It remains unresolved. The 60-day window now beginning is not a cooling off period. It is a negotiating pressure cooker with a deadline. The Gulf states that personally guaranteed an imminent deal, the ones who staked public credibility on the outcome, they understood this equation when they made those guarantees. Their intelligence picture of American operational posture in the theater is detailed and current. They knew what HELIOS represented. They knew the blockade numbers. They knew Iran's economic position. They made their guarantees not as expressions of optimism, but as calculations, made with full visibility into the pressure accumulating from every direction simultaneously. And they are now the stakeholders most invested in making sure the next 60 days produce something more durable than an MOU. Because the alternative to a durable deal is not a return to February 2026. The alternative is a second round fought against a defensive architecture that has been upgraded, stress-tested, and operationally confirmed in a live contested waterway. Or do you push toward a second round against conditions that have changed in ways your 30-year investment was not designed to address? There is no clean answer to that question. Institutions that face it almost never process it rationally and collectively. Different factions reach different conclusions. Hardline commanders read the situation through the lens of institutional survival and theological obligation simultaneously. Pragmatists calculate what the organization can still extract from a negotiating position versus what it loses in a military exchange. It cannot win the way it won in its own planning scenarios. This is the real story of the 60 days now beginning, not the headlines about who shook whose hand and where the ceremony was held. The actual story is a negotiation happening inside a severely damaged but still functioning institutional structure under the pressure of economic collapse, with an adversary that has just demonstrated it can run a directed energy weapon at $1 per engagement against the asymmetric strategy that was supposed to make this conflict unwinnable. 3 months ago, Iran held the Strait of Hormuz and believed the math ran in its favor. Today, the strait is reopening under an agreement Iran did not design. The math has been inverted, and the nuclear question that started everything is still sitting on a table in a negotiating room somewhere. That is not the end of a conflict. That is the moment just before we find out what kind of conflict comes next. The men and women still on watch in the Gulf tonight know that better than anyone. They are not standing down. They are watching.